Lexi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Pleasure. Um, so I wanted to start with, why is long COVID different to just fatigue, and why are they so often conflated?
Um, this is a difficult question, and I don't really know where to start with it. But I feel like I have sort of felt tired for like a lot of my 20s. Just what life is like. You just kind of socializing, being active, working, doing all of those things. And it gets quite exhausting. But long COVID is just something completely different because for me, I just woke up one day and it genuinely felt like my limbs were all just weighed down to the mattress with sandbags, and I just could not move. My head just felt like someone had pumped it full of fog. Everything hurt. I was aching. That fluey feeling where you touch your skin and it's like tingly and quite sore. And it was just like nothing else I had ever experienced before. And I had glandular fever when I was 16, and I thought that was the illest I was ever going to feel. But long COVID trumps that for sure.
I think this is quite common. I think a lot of people who have long COVID or chronic fatigue syndrome, they've experienced illnesses like that before,
Mm-hmm.
or they've maybe experienced incredible bouts of fatigue and tiredness, whether it be through training camps because they're an
Yeah.
athlete, whether it be festivals, whether it be at uni when we're going out a little bit too
Yeah.
much. But I think there's just this massive conflation when you hear the word fatigue, you hear the word tiredness, and we all know what that feels like, don't we? We know that feeling of when you've had a big long run, you've run a 10K, or maybe you've been running on no hours sleep, maybe
Yeah.
you've been revising for your exam. But I think it's fundamentally a flaw with the description when we talk about it as fatigue or tiredness, because it's so easy then to veer into the territory of, oh, well, that's normal.
Yeah.
Fatigue and tiredness is normal. It's a normal part of life.
Yeah.
And it doesn't quite do it justice to the ill sensation
Mm-hmm.
that it really is about.
Yeah.
It's that combination between illness and just inability to move.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult because ultimately fatigue is about it is a kind of tiredness in a way, but it's just so much more than that. But for anyone who hasn't experienced it, the easiest way to explain it is like, oh, it's like being really, really tired. It's like not having slept for three
Yeah.
days and trying to run, or it's like having the flu. And people can kind of grasp onto those. But I certainly was like this before I had long COVID. I always saw tiredness as something that you can just push through. You can rest and then just keep pushing through, and it's a mindset thing. But that's just not the same with long COVID. And as you probably know, pushing through just ends you somewhere even worse than where you were to start with.
I think that's so true because, yeah, conventional tiredness, even if you've done a ton of exercise, you haven't slept in days, you can physically, literally push through that. You can actually get through. But with this kind of fatigue, and this is why I've actually gone away from using the word fatigue. I don't tend to use that. I just describe it as illness.
Yeah.
Because the only way I can get a kind of glimpse of what that might be like for someone who hasn't experienced it is essentially being ill. It's essentially having the flu, plus a kind of hangover, plus a kind of maybe been punched in the head.
Concussion.
It's it's a combination of all of these things. And I think that's the best way to try and allow people to understand. But this is the reason why it's so very hard to get a accurate diagnosis and an accurate understanding of what's going on, because one of the main symptoms, as I'm sure you're aware, is post-exertional malaise. When you exercise and then it's as though you come down with the flu as a result of that.
Yeah.
How do you explain that to people? Because exercise is good, right? Exercise is good for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard. And when I was first, I actually, just on what you said before, changing from fatigue to unwell, I actually found that really empowering. So after a few months of not really knowing what was going on, and every time someone asked me what was going on, I would say, oh, I'm feeling really fatigued, I don't know what's going on, I just switched that to I've been really unwell, they're not sure what it is, but kind of these are my symptoms. And for me, that was really empowering, because I was like asserting, I am not well, please understand this. And then kind of followed that up with what I was unwell with. But going back to your question, which was, how do you explain post-exertional malaise? I mean, it's really hard, because I kept trying to go to the gym, even when I was unwell, and I just kept trying to push, because I thought my body will eventually just kind of click back into gear, and it will just know, like, I'm exercising, I'm eating well, I'm doing the right things, it will get better. But then, as you say, I would go to the gym on a day when I felt good, and then I would just feel horrendous. I would just have like a really heavy head and have a headache and just feel horrendous. And then I would think, oh gosh, okay, well, I'm going to have to skip my workout today, so I'll just go tomorrow instead. And then eventually it got to a point where I realized that I needed to stop exercising, because it was getting me kind of further and further down a rabbit hole I didn't need to be going down.
So for you, with the exercise, was it negating any progress you were making and pushing you further and further and making you feel worse and worse? Or did you manage to find a kind of happy medium where you were moving to a degree? Because this is something that is very tricky, because obviously for any normal healthy person, if you're feeling down, if you're feeling under the weather, if you're you're not feeling right, the solution, certainly for me, 99% of the time, is go out and have a tough training session. That sort my head out, get me in a better headspace. How have you dealt with that, and how do you approach it when intense exercise in fact causes you to feel worse?
I mean, it's really hard, because also anyone who loves exercising and it's part of their like mental health regime, which it definitely was for me, it's really hard to just stop doing that. But ultimately there came a time where I realized that I was just not able to do it. I just couldn't get out of bed, and I gave myself a grace period where I was just literally not exercising. If I didn't get out of the house, that was fine. If I made it out the house and I only made it down the street and back walking, then that was fine. And for a good 6 months, I was doing zero exercise, like absolutely nothing. I was pottering around the house, and then when I could, I would go for a very short walk. But other than that, absolutely nothing. And then I found some like long COVID classes online. And for me, that was when I started feeling so much better, like in my body, because I was doing gentle movement, which is super important for recovery, but it wasn't challenging my body and putting me into that post-exertional malaise state. So I found a way that I could move my body and get the kind of gentle mental health benefits of moving my body, but not suffer the consequences.
Yeah, I think stretching and yoga, certainly for me, I found it invaluable, especially like early on, because just sitting there and not moving at all has all sorts of health implications, because your blood flow, your lymph nodes, nothing is moving, nothing is flushing things out correctly, and that is incredibly damaging. Not only that you are kind of your mental state as well gets pushed even further, but then a lot of people try and compensate for that. Well, I certainly did, by trying to push to an extreme, and then that would put me back 3 steps, and I feel even worse. So for me, and it sounds like for you, yin yoga, gentle stretching, doing a deep stretch and a good long half an hour or an hour of stretching, you might not even leave the floor. You might just be lying on the floor, lifting your leg up, right? But I actually feel like the endorphin rush you get after that is somewhat substantial, and you also feel in your body, it negates some of those aches and pains that are kind of brought on by just sitting there. So it sounds like that really helped you as well then.
100%. And also, to be honest, it's also just something to do in the day.
Yeah.
Like going from, I mean, I don't know what you do what you did with your time before long COVID, but for me, I had a kind of 9 to 8 job, and it would be, gym before work, and then I'd be working, I'd have my lunch break, I'd have my dinner, like everything was kind of a set timetable. And going from that to I've got all this time in the day, I don't have the energy to be on my phone. I don't have the energy to watch loads of TV. I don't have the energy to read. Like, what am I going to do all day other than sleep? And actually building in that very gentle stretching was a way to get me out of bed without overexerting. And it gave me a sense of purpose in my day. Like, just having one thing, like, Tom would get home from work and he would say, how's today been? And I could say, oh, I did something. I did half an hour of stretching, and that was a huge achievement. And I think that kind of sense of, I've done something today, I've achieved something, I've made a tiny step towards recovery. That like is a huge change, and is such a beneficial thing about moving.
Yeah, it's so important as well to have some degree of agency, I think, or that I'm being useful in some kind of way. Because it sounds like you were a super active, very much a kind of go-getter. You enjoyed life, enjoyed doing things, enjoyed being committed to something. And when that's kind of stripped away from you, it's very demoralizing. The fact that you struggle to, you can't do the same level of output as you did before, or that you wanted to. But having that degree of, okay, I did do something, I completed something, and I have something that I can put my mind to. I had this I spoke about this in one of my videos, how a period, especially when I was feeling physically very unwell, but mentally I could comprehend some stuff. I did a bit of language learning. So I would do a little bit of listening and a little bit of speaking. And that at least gave me some agency. I was like, okay, I've ticked something off today. Like, I've done something.
I'm building myself as a person, however small it might be. I'm not going backwards in my life. Yeah,
for sure.
It's so good. I actually have found recently, like cooking. So cooking an evening meal has been like, yes, I've done a new recipe. I've done something new. I've made something tangible for Tom and I to enjoy together. And for me, it takes up an hour in the evening or an hour and a half in the evening. It's not super intense because I can do it sitting down mostly. And it just gives that sense of accomplishment.
What would you say to people who say that maybe you aren't suffering with long COVID, maybe you are just deconditioned, maybe there's a case that you need to level up your exercise. Maybe there's a case that deconditioning is what's really at play here. We hear this a lot. So what would you say? What would you say to that?
I'm fortunate that no one's actually said that to me. But I mean, I think I would explode if someone said it to me. I mean, it's just not deconditioning. Like, I know what it feels like to be unfit. I've had knee injuries where I haven't been able to run or cycle, and you come back and you think, oh gosh, I'm so unfit. But you can just push through it, and actually you recover the next day. You might have a bit of DOMS, but the next, you recover absolutely fine. You don't feel exhausted the next day. But I have dabbled with trying to get back to running in the last 3 months or so. And the way I have started that is with a very slow 1 kilometer. 1 kilometer, that wouldn't even be a warm up for me before. But a 1 kilometer jog at a very slow pace on flat ground. And the feeling in my body as I do it is like, oh my gosh, nothing's been used in a really long time. But then the moment I get home, everything has been like full aches. It's felt like I've run a marathon. My legs are just like lead, starting to seize up. My chest is really tight. And the next day I feel just absolutely exhausted. And for me, that's why I know I'm not ready to get back to running properly. I keep trying it because at some point I will be ready to run again, but just not yet. And so I kind of just keep listening to my body, and the fact that I'm absolutely flattened after a 1 kilometer run means I'm just not ready yet. And that's not deconditioning, because however unfit you are, a 1 kilometer jog is so unlikely to cause that kind of effect.
I agree. It's almost like this little switch that goes off. And I don't know about you. I do feel super grateful that I'm in a position now where I can do quite a decent amount of exercise. But again, it's different from being unfit, because being unfit, you go, you do your run, you do your workout, whatever, and you're like, wow, it feels normal. It feels normal, but you feel out of shape. And then the next day you go and you're a little bit better. And the next day you go and you're a little bit better. But there's something fundamentally off when you go to do your workout, you go to do your exercise, and then immediately afterwards you start feeling flu-like, and you feel this concussion feeling coming on. It's not normal. It's not a rational explanation for not being able to do exercise when somebody is clearly not deconditioned. Because don't get me wrong, deconditioning, I think it does play a part if you are genuinely bedbound. There will be an element of deconditioning to your situation as well, but you can't get around the fact that there's also a part of play, which is the fact that there's something clicking and not and firing when it shouldn't be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the issue with people kind of making suggestions, people say like, oh, it's deconditioning, or people just want there to be a logical explanation for why people are ill with long COVID. And you see it all over social media. I don't know if you've ever had comments on your videos, but people will say, it's because I'm not vegan, but I've seen other comments saying it's because you're vegan, or it's because you eat meat, or it's because you don't eat gluten, or it's because you do eat gluten. And, it's because you're not exercising, it's because you are exercising. There's just, everyone wants to find a reason for people being unwell with long COVID. But ultimately, we don't really know the specific reasons why we are unwell with long COVID in the way that we are. And I think down the line, it will probably be that long COVID is actually broken out into 5 or 6 different illnesses, all of which have been triggered by a COVID infection. But that's why it's so hard to pin down what's causing it. And it's why it's hard for people to get their heads around, because it's not something we have answers to. And we're very unaccustomed to that in the world we live in, where medicine can achieve so much, but we just don't have the answers at the moment. And that's why it's so difficult for people to comprehend that there could be a new illness without answers.
I agree. I think it comes from a place of this desire to rationalize everything and try and comprehend, whether that be from a patient perspective or whether it be from an observer. But I have to sympathize and think, if I told myself 3-4 years ago, I said, yeah, so when you exercise, you get the flu, I'd be like, what? What are you like? what are you talking about? Sense. It doesn't make any sense. So we have to bear that in mind, I think, when we try and explain and try and seek to understand. I think this is why so many people who are either have observed it or either experience it themselves, it's very easy to want to latch on to some explanation, whether that be the vaccine, maybe it was the vaccine, or whether it was, exposure to certain toxins. Or I think you see that within the patient community as well, because I certainly experienced that, where every potential new theory would come out and I would latch onto that. It must be that. It must be nicotine. It must be autoimmunity. It must be this. It must be that. And I think this kind of seeking to rationalize can be kind of harmful on both sides, because at some points we just have to throw up our hands and say, look, we don't know right now. We're doing our best to try and understand, but we deal with what we've got and we work from that going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard. And also you throw into the mix the fact that everyone who has long COVID, there are over 200 symptoms.
Yes.
So everyone's bodies are responding completely differently to the virus. And then on top of that, everyone's bodies will respond differently to the hundreds of different possible treatments that are available. And the number of people who say, try this, try that, and it's really difficult. And especially, as I'm sure you know, like once you put yourself out there on social media, people want to help. And so people make all these suggestions, but it can be extremely overwhelming when you think like, oh gosh, okay, there's 20 supplements I need to try. And then I need to also start having like lymphatic drainage massage and acupuncture and buy an acupuncture mat and all of these things, and it adds up to a lot of cost. But also, like, we just don't have the time or energy to be like researching what each of these things is actually going to do for us and whether they will work for us. And actually I went to the long COVID kind of specialist that I was seeing and asked him about some of the supplements, and he was like, look, that's just not really my area. I don't really know if these are going to help you or not. And so then you end up kind of chasing your tail, trying to go to a nutritionist or a dietitian who might be able to help advise you on whether or not you need all of these supplements, and you just get kind of stuck trying to work out, desperately trying to save yourself, but no one really knows. So it's a bit kind of trial and error.
Yeah, and people can easily fall prey to miracle cures and so on, because it's very, like, I guarantee you ask pretty much everyone who's experienced this. You said, give me your entire life savings and I will make you better like that. I'd say pretty much 99% of people would be like, yeah, of course, like straight away. But it's the fact that because people are so desperate like that, they are willing to invest a lot. I've spent tons of money on like hyperbaric chamber, which did actually, I think, help me a bit. You know, I've paid for. I had like a woman on Zoom telling me to stand up and close my eyes, and I've done all sorts of.
There are a lot of out there treatments available.
As a rational, I like to think of myself as a rational person, but when you reach a level of kind of desperation, you go to what the conventional system would say, right, we provide the answers for you, and they say, I don't really know. You kind of think, well, what do I do? Or do I just say, okay, well that's just tough luck, or do I go and seek out answers for myself? And I think that's what leads to a lot of these kind of rogue kind of treatments and people being desperate.
I do find, I don't know if you find this as well, but I find my perspective on medicine and wellness has changed drastically so quickly. So I come from a family of doctors. I have lots of doctors in the family, so I was always like, Western medicine, you know, modern medicine, it can cure anything, like we're great, like I can do whatever to my body, and if I get ill I'll just, you know, take some antibiotics or painkillers or whatever and I'll be fine. And obviously now I'm realizing that wellness and preventative medicine, I guess it's kind of just looking after your body and eating right, that's actually so important. So I've had this huge, like, drastic kind of mindset shift of how I need to look after myself going forward, which is a huge silver lining to this. I'd rather not have had to go through this to realize it, but it is something that's going to stand me in really good stead once I have recovered.
I think I can't think of many people who have had long COVID or chronic fatigue who haven't been led to a more holistic approach. I think we're very used to having this kind of tick box approach. I'm ill, go to the doctor, tick, 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 tick. Right, we give you this and you're magically cured like that. And I think it's led people to have to take a more kind of holistic approach and think of things that are just fundamental to health. Sunlight, taking care of your mind, eating well, all of these kind of things that are the sort of foundational cornerstones of good health, but isn't really talked about. It's more just a case of, well, you get a pill and then you recover. But when that side of things hasn't necessarily worked for you, I don't know about you, but I feel like I've got a bit of disillusionment with the whole medical system in many ways because of the kind of experience I had with it, and I kind of take an attitude now of more just whilst I get things checked out, I try and just do a lot of stuff myself. I don't know what your opinion is.
I think I'm really lucky because my work has we have like in-house private GPs. And I had private health insurance through work, which means that I am in like a very lucky minority of people who I managed to get my diagnosis pretty quickly. It was kind of confirmed May last year, and my main symptoms first started in September the year before. So it was less than a year to get my diagnosis, which I feel is reasonably quick. And I was sent to a lot of specialists quite quickly. Having said that, it was me who had to push for the referral to a like long COVID specialist. The GPs were happy to kind of sign me off work and say like, yeah, something's clearly not right, but they just thought it was mental health because I was really struggling with the kind of depression and mood swings and anxiety, which were brought on at the same time as the fatigue and the stomach symptoms. And they kind of just thought it was depression, and I just knew something was wrong. I just knew that something was wrong in my body and it wasn't normal. And so I really had to push, and I found out from my dad who the long COVID person was. and basically said, like, I need to see him.
Mm-hmm.
I need to get some answers. And from seeing him, I then managed to get a few other referrals, which got my kind of POTS diagnosis, the long COVID diagnosis. I had lots of heart checks, ECGs, all of that, lung function tests and all of that. And so that was when I actually started to get taken a bit more seriously, as like not just fatigue and depression, but actually long COVID is something that is affecting your breathing and your heart and like your brain as well. And so that for me was quite validating. And so I was very lucky in that sense. But then I see stories online of people who are having to wait months and months just to see the specialist who's going to supposedly help them, and then the specialist can't do anything. And that is just heartbreaking, because we are, as a kind of group of unwell people, clinging on to any kind of help the medical community can give. And so when you're just dismissed because they don't have the answers or they don't have the tests at their disposal, it's really hard to take, because you just feel like you're kind of in a dark hole. Like, no one cares about me, no one understands what I'm going through. How am I ever going to get better?
I think this is a real key reason why we need to start finding answers and start finding just try and find answers about this. Because if we also take into consideration that, I mean, you, like you said, you're grateful that you actually managed to get a GP appointment, and yet it was still incredibly frustrating, still incredibly difficult, still incredibly alienating. But then we think, because if we extrapolate the effects of long COVID and ME/CFS, not just to Western countries across Europe and across the US, we think this is an issue in Sudan, this is an issue in Yemen, this is an issue in Libya. And it does make you think we need to start finding answers to help both not only people here, because we know how debilitating it is when you're in a Western and really blessed situation, and we need to start finding answers to be able to help everyone all the way across the board.
It's difficult, and I can't remember, there was an article maybe about 9 months ago which was talking about that exact kind of point, which is that if we're struggling in countries where we supposedly have, you know, really supportive healthcare systems, then how on earth are people in other countries where long COVID isn't even really known about at all, like how on earth are they coping? And that really kind of struck a nerve with me. And it wasn't really one of the main reasons why I set up my own Instagram account, but it was that kind of awareness raising and wanting people to really know what it was. I found that speaking to friends or family, I'd say, oh, I have long COVID, and they'd say like, oh, what is that? Just being really tired. And you're like, no, it's so much more than that. And this is the problem. People don't know what it is, and we need people to talk about it. We need people to know what it is, so that there's more incentive for investment, research, like funding, that kind of thing. Because unless people realize the scale of the issue and how it will affect the economy, having so many people out of work, we need people to know about it so that we get investment. Like, I just don't understand how we don't have answers yet, and we really do need them. And I feel like it's a really interesting area of science as well. And solving long COVID will hopefully really help those with ME, which as well is a huge economic problem, because if you have all of these people out of work who are constantly requiring referrals for us in the UK, the NHS, where actually if there's something else that could cure them rather than just sending them to all of the different departments, I just think it would be a huge breakthrough.
Have you seen the Cutler report, which estimated the financial impact of long COVID?
No, I haven't.
So I think they estimated the financial impact to be $3.1 trillion globally. At the moment, globally, or potentially was that even just the US? Either way, it's quite a big number. It's a big number.
It's global, but
and it was really, again, talking about the scale of the problem that will go that will lead going forward. We see in the UK even, we see the disability rates and the number of people out of work rising. And there's a number of proposals and hypotheses put forward as to why that's happening. I saw one recently about back pain from working at home too much being one of the ones that so many people are off work. And I was like, yeah, okay. It's like, definitely. But you see it sharply increase after COVID.
Interesting.
And I think the sympathy part only goes so far.
Yeah.
And I really think playing the economic impact, the financial impact, is one of the strongest routes we can attack to get progress and to get interest into the area. Because at the end of the day, people are generally sympathetic, but when presented with this will affect this about the economy, this will affect this about GDP, etc., that I think is how you really, unfortunately, get through to the people who matter.
I completely agree. It's such a sad fact, but in the world we live in, you're 100% right.
Yeah.
And I think the thing with long COVID is, if you take one symptom, for example, POTS, there are so many patients who are suffering with POTS symptoms and get referred to cardiologists to deal with those symptoms or to check them. But ultimately, there's not really that much that the cardiologist can do. And all of these POTS patients seeing the cardiologist kind of builds up the waiting list for other people who have heart conditions that need to see the cardiologist. Whereas actually, if you just go to the root cause, which is the kind of autonomic dysfunction in the body, if you go to the root cause and solve that, then that takes a huge burden off the healthcare system, which ultimately the government should want. But it's just so difficult trying to explain all of this in a way that makes the important people listen.
For sure. So you mentioned earlier about your page, so your Instagram page that you're doing. What's the purpose behind that then? What are you trying to... We've obviously talked a little bit about how we see change being driven. What's your purpose with that, and how are you approaching your awareness and advocacy?
Yeah, so for me, it's one of the main reasons I started it was because I felt so isolated and so alone when I was first unwell, and it kind of felt like everyone who had long COVID was alone in their beds or in the sofa in the dark, not speaking to anyone else, not knowing anyone else who had this condition. And I found a few accounts online, and that made me feel less alone. And I thought, why don't I share what I'm going through? I feel well enough now that I can put myself out there. It was so scary. Like, I never put myself out there like in that kind of way in public, but actually it has felt so, I don't know what the word is. It just felt very like meaningful to me, because I get so many messages from people, messages of support and messages saying that they feel so comforted and so much less alone. And for me, that was a huge part of it initially. I thought I'd have a couple hundred followers and we'd have a cute little community online and we'd be able to comfort each other. But actually, I've become more motivated to raise lots of awareness. The more people who are messaging me saying, like, I'm in this dire situation, I can't see a doctor, I've got kids I need to look after, I've got to work, like financially I need to keep working. And that really triggered my emotions and wanted me to just keep raising awareness and do as much as I can to get the word out there that long COVID needs to be taken seriously. So it's kind of a comfort and a page where people can see someone else who's going through exactly the same things that they're going through, but also a kind of advocacy and awareness raising page, which hopefully as I get better, or as I kind of get further through my recovery, I'll be able to commit to more and more. Whereas at the moment, I still feel quite fragile. So advocating kind of, on difficult topics or putting myself out there or getting really passionate about things is something that would push me into a kind of crash state. So I try to avoid that now. But as I get better, I'm hoping that that's something I could do more and more.
What are the other challenges with posting and putting yourself out there? Because we hear a lot about this with influencers getting hate or draining. What was your experience with that?
For the most part, it's actually been very positive. There are the odd kind of comments that are not particularly pleasant. I had one which upset me last month, where someone said, like, I posted a day in the life reel, and someone said something like, "This isn't long COVID. You're doing a disservice to people who are actually suffering." And for me, I think it was difficult because that was someone who had long COVID pulling me down when I have long COVID and I'm trying to raise awareness. And you just think, well, if people within our own community are behaving like that, how can we possibly expect people outside, like people who don't have long COVID, to take us seriously? And I find it difficult because it exists on a spectrum, right? You have people who are extremely severe, and the long COVID might have triggered a severe ME state.
Yeah.
And I feel desperately for those people. But that's not my experience. I can only share my experience, otherwise it's disingenuous. So I share what I can. And compared to any normal person, my life is not a good one. Like, no one would want to trade places with me because my health is bad. It's not normal to be off work for 16, 17 months at a time at my age. Like, that's not normal. And so for someone to say, like, this isn't real long COVID, you're not suffering enough, that I found quite difficult. But for the most part, actually, it's very positive. I think I touched on it earlier, but one of the main challenges is dealing with the number of people who make suggestions about things that have helped them, because they all say it in such good faith, and they're just saying things that have helped them that might help me. But it can get extremely overwhelming quite quickly. So I just kind of have to stick to my own path, know what I'm doing. And then listen to what people are saying, so that if someone else messages me and says, I'm struggling with this, I might be able to make a suggestion. But I think that's probably one of the more challenging aspects.
Yeah, because like, I sympathize with a lot of people because, and I've said this before, like, I'm truly blessed to be, like, even though I'm not where I'd like to be, I'm so blessed. And I really empathize with people who are bedbound, have been bedbound for years and years. But all you can do, like you said, is talk about your experience. And by producing this kind of animosity towards people within the kind of network, it does more harm than good. Because if people outside then also see that, and also I've seen people on Twitter and so on attacking other people outside of the network, and you don't understand, and you're this, you're that. That doesn't actually help either. And whilst I understand the frustration, because it's incredibly galling when you see people saying it doesn't exist, you're making it up, etc. I do believe that the way forward is not to conflict and to try and tear these people down, but to educate and let your positive voice be louder and be a kind of beacon of optimism and a direction forward. Because the one thing that you never want to be, I don't think, and certainly, like, the network in general, you don't want to be interpreted as these are just a bunch of moany people who are just constantly shouting. I think it's so important to have a plan and have a direction with which we are going with this, a direction where we want to go, and a roadmap of how we can get there, as opposed to this echo chamber of negative noise.
Yeah. I like you said, it's so hard because when you're in a dire state, you just want to shake people and say, like, I don't want to live like this. Obviously, I don't want to live like this. I'm 30 years old. Obviously, I don't want to be bedbound. I want to be out there living my life. But you do. I really try to, like you say, kind of take a deep breath and just think, like, okay, how can I get my message across best? Because there are some people out there, keyboard warriors, as they call them, who will just always say something controversial. There are people who will just not listen and who have their beliefs and they aren't particularly interested in what you can educate them on. But I'd like to think that's a minority, and there are lots of people who are kind of trained to think one way. So because long COVID isn't talked about openly, they don't really think it's a real thing, or they don't know much about it. But by us educating them, if they read more, they see more, they understand more about the long COVID experience, they will hopefully start to soften a bit and realize that it is something that needs to be taken seriously. So yeah, I think you're right, to kind of educate rather than hate. But it's such a difficult path, like line to tread, because sometimes you do just want to say like
fuck off.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, and it depends on, you know, when you see, for example, you see certain comments or criticism, and it very much varies with the intent from where that criticism has come from.
Yeah.
So there can be comments and criticism which is, I read and I'm actually really appreciative of. I really appreciate it. It's a comment like, whether it be from within the network, so I really enjoy your stuff usually, but this one I felt like it missed the mark because of this. And I really value that. And likewise from people outside, I don't really know much about it, but is this not maybe just a result of the vaccine or something like that? But it's in good faith, and it's a genuine question and a genuine intent to learn more.
Yeah.
But the issue comes when you have comments which are, you never had long COVID.
Yeah.
You're a hypochondriac. You're
you just
and
don't
so
want
on.
to work. You just want benefit. Yeah.
Exactly.
There's so much of that.
So I think when those sort of comments go on, I tend to just try and just ignore that. But I really, in fact, actually value, and I think it is important when you see those positive and constructive criticisms, because then it makes you think, and you think, okay, what am I missing in terms of my messaging that is making it still confusing for other people? Where am I missing the spot? And I think that allows you to kind of improve with what you're doing.
Definitely. And I actually had a good kind of conversation with someone with severe ME on social media recently, and it was on this subject of whether kind of people who are slightly milder should disclose that they're mild, or whether you should just be able to say I have long COVID and that's that. And actually it was really good to hear her views on it, and for me to understand that actually maybe I should be saying more in my captions, or just a kind of a one sentence to say like, I appreciate that I'm lucky that I'm recovering, or, you know, there are lots of people who aren't recovering, just so that anyone who comes across my content knows that they're automatically like, there is a scale and I'm kind of in the middle of it and recovering, but there are people who are much worse and who aren't recovering, and that is why they need help. We as a community need help.
I think it's also very important that it doesn't turn into a suffer off contest. I think I see that a lot.
Yeah.
And because I wrote this recently, someone somewhere would do anything to trade places with you.
Yeah.
And I really believe that it doesn't, because like I said earlier, there will be, as horrendous as your situation may be, you may be bedbound, you may be experiencing terrible pain, which I see from a lot of people who I come across on Twitter, and I see the pictures and it's horrendous. But there will also be somebody who lives in Sudan and their kids have just been blown up, and they are also bedbound in their rubble. And that makes me think and appreciate a lot. And I think it's very important that we don't get into this kind of outdoing in terms of suffering. I think that's very important, that we raise awareness, and we and it adds a bit of humility, I think, doesn't it? When you add something like you said, look, I appreciate where I'm at, but equally that doesn't mean that I am content and I don't want to push things forward.
And it's difficult as well for me. It's almost finding the line between acknowledging that it could be worse, but also not self-gaslighting every single time I post. So I'm not saying this was my crash day and to me it felt rubbish and it brought my mood down and I felt really low, but it could have been worse. Like, And so I just have to kind of stay true to myself. And I think a lot of people have messaged saying that seeing my recovery gives them a lot of hope and gives them motivation. And for me, certainly knowing people who have had long COVID, who are like yourself further along in the recovery process, that is a huge motivation, because you can see that there is hope for the future, and that's really important. And so it's finding the line between raising awareness and making sure people know how serious it is, but then also making sure that people in the community who might be 6 months behind me in their recovery know that it does get better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a difficult line to tread, but I'm only human, and I'm also battling long COVID at the same time, so I will make mistakes, but I just, like you say, keep trying to learn from them.
Yeah, and I think there's it shouldn't be like walking on eggshells. Like when I see people, well, you didn't mention this, you didn't, and I'm like, come on, like you're somebody who's sharing what you're experiencing, and there's no, you don't need to put like caveats on every. I had this on Twitter where I would put out posts, and I would add a caveat where possible. And also, actually, do you know what I think is really beneficial and has helped me is when I'm talking about stuff and I say, this really helped me, and or I found that this, because if you come from a point of you should do this to recover from long COVID or whatever, you should be doing this, I think then people, they get their back up a little bit. But if you say, I did this and it helped me, and even if someone said, oh yeah, you can't say, I'm like, well, I'm just sharing my honest opinion.
And I think actually that's all we can do, because we're not doctors. We can't be giving out like medical advice. I don't want to tell someone, I'm on an antidepressant, therefore you should really take this antidepressant, it'll be great for you, because I don't know their medical history. I don't know what else they might have going on in their body, so I can't give someone advice on medications to take or whether they need to do acupuncture, because also we don't know people's financial situations, whether they can afford those things. All we can say is, like, this is my story, be here and follow me if you want to,
take it or leave it,
but if you don't, then please don't hate me. Basically, is all we can do.
So in terms of going to things that have helped you, what's been beneficial, what hasn't?
I mean, like you, it's been a bit of a roller coaster. I feel like I've tried so many different things, and to be totally honest, I think the biggest thing has just been time, like just giving myself time and space to get better. For me, one of my really bad symptoms was my gut symptoms, and obviously there's a lot of emerging research around the kind of gut-brain axis and how poor gut health can cause poor mental health, and how that can then affect the body. I don't think that's what's caused my long COVID, but obviously the long COVID may have triggered some gut issues, and then that's just kind of been a feedback cycle. So for me, sorting that out really, really helped. I basically just overhauled my nutrition and just started, I kind of switched to like Tim Spector. I don't know if you know Tim Spector.
I recognize the name.
He's behind all the Zoe health studies. So I actually did the Zoe health study, but I listened to a lot of his podcast. I kind of took his approach of trying to get in as many different plant-based foods a week, aiming for like 20 to 30, and taking probiotics and just really looking after my gut health, and that has made a huge difference. And then actually acupuncture recently has been targeting my gut as well, and I think it's too soon to tell on that front, but I mean, definitely not constantly feeling nauseous like 24/7 has helped.
It's an improvement.
And knowing that like the food is like, my body is now absorbing the nutrients from the food, which it probably wasn't before, is also great news, because my body needs the energy to recover. So that's probably one of the main things that's helped. But that was very specific to me.
So what is your because we hear so much about like diets and like different. I've tried like endless different. Tried all sorts of weird diets.
Well, this is the thing. There's so many people just say, "Oh, do this, do that, cut out gluten, cut out dairy," but it's so hard.
So what does your diet like look like roughly at the moment? Is it like plant based or? I
have kind of tried to move to a slightly more vegetarian diet. I personally I just don't believe in like really extreme diets. For me, I don't want to cut out any food group completely. That's just not the way I want to live. So for me, it's like I eat a lot of fish. I try to like I'm quite conscious about like sustainability and the environment, which is why I'm trying to cut down my meat, but I don't want to go vegetarian whilst also dealing with long COVID, because I don't want to make any massive changes. So I eat a lot of lean meat, a lot of fish, and then whole grains, kind of lentils, brown rice, chickpeas, lots of different vegetables, roasted vegetables, like, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to explain. And then breakfast, I try not to have like too much sugar, so like lots of full fat Greek yogurt with fruit, nuts, seeds, that kind of thing. And yeah, I'm trying to stabilize my blood sugar, so I try not to eat too many like rich carbs. So
Yeah.
if I'm not keen on cutting out carbs completely, because carbs are life, but
Pizza.
yeah,
Love it.
pizza, pasta, can't live without them. Love rice. Like I would never go that extreme.
Yeah.
But like trying to just watch when I eat the carbs, so not having a really carby dinner just before I go to sleep, because insomnia was a big issue for me.
Yes.
And like making sure I have like a light-ish dinner and a few hours before I go to bed as well. And there's just tricks you can do, like eating a bit of protein before you eat your carbs, that kind of thing. I follow the glucose goddess.
I
Yeah,
was literally just
love
about to say,
her.
yeah, I saw that. I saw
So
the episode
yeah,
on.
I tried the vinegar for a while, but I thought like that can't be doing
Yeah,
my
that's
gut
pretty
any
grim.
good. But yeah, so just kind of little tips and tricks like that. I'm still learning. I think it's an like it's a kind of progressive journey. So the further I get into recovery, the more I'll kind of focus on the nutrition that like really works for me. But for now, I'm just keeping it as simple as possible and just kind of going back to basics, literally what you learn at school, like greens, carbs, protein, fat, and just sticking with that.
That sounds like a very healthy and balanced approach, because we hear about all these different diets, and I went through, I tried like a vegan diet for a bit. I did a carnivore diet for a bit. I did like gluten-free. I did no dairy. I did all sorts of, some that were focusing on like certain food groups, low histamine as well. But
oh gosh, low histamine.
I found that, to be honest, with a lot of these things, when I was like purposely avoiding stuff, it would then almost become a self-fulfilling prophecy when I did actually have any of that food group. And it kind of like, it became such a chore trying to avoid certain things. They got to the point I was just like, this is causing me more misery than it's worth. And I think I've kind of, also sort of balanced on a roughly kind of paleo, like generally eat lean meats, fish, lots of veg, and then like rice and potatoes. And then I'll have like a bit of a treat every now and again.
Gotta have a chocolate.
It's got to be done, because we went to Rome a little while back as well, and I was like,
so good.
I'm not
when
gonna
in Rome, literally.
I'm not gonna not eat pasta every day.
So good.
I had a question. Why do you think long COVID ME/CFS have historically had such a kind of stigma and inability to be understood and comprehended?
I mean, my knowledge of the history of ME is not good enough, but I did read, I don't know if you read the Guardian article recently. I can't remember who wrote it, and it was basically talking about the fact that ME was dismissed back in the 70s as mass hysteria because it mostly affected women. And it was thought that women are weak of mind, and therefore, they're just making up these symptoms. They just can't handle it. They have a, very sensitive disposition, and they basically dismissed it as a female issue and that it was all in the mind. And that sort of just carried through for decades. And I think it started to get a bit more attention in the late 90s, early 2000s. But to be honest, if they had made real progress, we probably wouldn't have this dilemma or this issue that we have now with long COVID. The reasons why, I don't know. I think it's probably because the severity of ME and the symptoms that are reported are so beyond what you could possibly imagine. And I think with something like cancer, you can see it. You have a blood test for it. You can see like, oh look, there's a tumor. And people know about it. With a heart issue, you can see it or you can measure it, and so you know that there's an issue. But with something like ME, when someone comes in and says, I've got really bad gut symptoms, I'm having migraines all the time, like I feel like I'm about to collapse constantly, I'm always like I can't move out of bed, I'm having heart palpitations, all over my body hurts, it's actually so hard to believe that could possibly happen without being able to see any signs of it on the body.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's all I can think, really. But if obviously we had investigated it sooner, then we probably would have some answers by now. But I don't know enough about it.
I think we like things that are tangible and visible, and okay, there's a tumor, or that's broken, etc., etc. And I think, like you said, so many of the symptoms as well are so bizarre. Everyone can relate to feeling ill. Everyone can relate to a broken leg. Everyone can relate to these sorts of illnesses or injuries. But like we said, when you talk about PEM, you talk about feeling flu-like and concussed after exercise. Yeah. You can't relate to that. You can't say, oh yeah, well, I know what that feels like, so it must be horrible to experience that all the time. And I think you're right about the female element to it.
Yeah.
I think it was dismissed as kind of, because it typically affects like middle-aged women more, and that was kind of put down to menopause and mass hysteria, like you said. And I think we even saw this with long COVID at the very, very beginning. And that was part of the reason why I think it was actually, and I spoke to Una about this, how people who are former athletes and actually guys as well coming forward, because rightly or wrongly, like, people were seeing middle-aged women saying, I'm suffering from this, and would instantly be kind of dismissed. And when you started to see people who are younger, athletes, then it actually started to get taken a little bit more seriously, because people would relate and say, okay, it's not just so-and-so going through her menopause, which is a sad state of affairs, but it's a block that we still have.
Yeah, and I think for me, actually seeing Una's story was something I shared quite widely with friends of mine and family, to say, like, look, she was a GB rower and she has gone through this too. Like, she is not weak-minded. She knows, like,
maybe
how
she's
to
deconditioned
train.
though.
Maybe she's just deconditioned. And I was like, look, it's not just me. Like, this is a real thing. And so that was great. And then actually I watched the Mark Cavendish documentary, and where he talks about his EBV struggles. And I didn't really know that
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, so he had EBV. I can't remember when it was, maybe 3-4 years ago. And he talks about it, and it affected his mental health. And he was talking about the sensation of being completely wiped out after training, and that he was just not able to train the way he could. And obviously he is one of the best British cyclists ever. He's super fit and healthy generally. And so for a kind of fatigue, a tiredness condition to affect him, I feel like that's also a really good story to share, because although EBV is slightly different, it's in the same family of kind of fatigue conditions where people just dismiss it because it's just tiredness, even though it's not. And so, I mean, that's definitely worth watching. I think the documentary is about an hour and a half, and the section on EBV is quite small, but it's a great documentary anyway, so I recommend.
I'll definitely give that a watch. In terms of now and going forward, then, how are you dealing with things? What's the approach that you're taking, and your general outlook at the moment?
So at the moment, I'm sort of trying to just stay very stable. I'm trying not to kind of go to loads of different doctor's appointments, because I find that exhausting. So I'm kind of just living my best baseline life. So I just like sticking
You're trying to make that a hashtag or something.
I'm just kind of really sticking to my routine, really trying to, I've actually just got my Visible Plus armband, which is giving me lots of very useful data about the kinds of activities that kind of trigger me into crashes. So that's really helpful. And I'm just like really getting into the detail of what I can manage day to day, and trying to stick to that so that I can really build a stable baseline from where I can start building up life again. I really want to get back to work this year, like desperately. I really want to be phasing back into work this summer, if I can. That will be starting on like a 1 morning a week basis, and then slowly building up from there. But it's just so difficult to plan and predict, because I have no idea how my health is going to be in a few months' time. I initially thought I'd be off work for 2 weeks, and then here I am 16 months later. But I'm feeling quite optimistic. I was feeling quite stable a few weeks ago. I've done a few things which have maybe tipped me a bit into kind of below baseline territory, but I have generally been feeling much better. And as we go into spring and summer, where we've got more light, I think it's a really good time for healing. And I definitely felt like I made good progress last spring. So I'm hoping for the same again. And yeah, just generally feeling quite good. Obviously, I had a tick bite a few weeks ago, which developed a kind of Lyme disease rash around it. I've gone on antibiotics, so I'm keeping everything crossed that doesn't develop into something more serious. But
you called it early, like that.
I think that's early.
One of the key things with Lyme's.
I mean, it came out of nowhere. I'm not going near long grass at the moment. I have a paved back garden, and I don't leave my house. So I don't know where it came from, but you know, unlucky. But I guess that's also a kind of lesson to myself as well. And don't stress about things that you can't control. Like, I could have been stressing about a long COVID reinfection, and instead I got a random tick bite from nowhere. So it's just, I'm very much a kind of come what may attitude at the moment. I'm doing everything that I can to get better. But I'm riding the waves of long COVID at the moment. And yeah, I'm optimistic.
So you're approaching it with a kind of stoic steadfastness, just kind of accept what happens.
Come what may. So long as I'm doing everything in my control to get better and to look after my body, then I'm just going to take what comes. Like, if my body's not ready to fully heal, then it's not ready to fully heal, but I'm doing the best I can. So that's...
I think it's very powerful, because it's, like you say, you cannot control it, and this is happening. It's happening, it's existing. And there is no... I really felt for a long time this kind of like constant comparison in my mind, and constant craving, and when I have this, or when I feel this, I will be better. And you're constantly making this almost contract with myself of when I reach there, I will be happy, or that when I reach with this level of health, I'll be happy again. And I've really felt that this kind of deficit was just perpetuating unhappiness, and just this constant when I reach there, and it's this like a never reaching goal that constantly kind of extends and extends and extends. Whereas I think taking the approach of this is here, and I can sit with it and embrace whatever's happening, whilst also, like you said, doing whatever is within your control to try and improve the situation is quite empowering as well. And I think that's a very, very, very powerful approach.
Yeah, it's difficult. And I saw a comment recently on someone else's social media which said something like, "I will not bow down to this illness," in the sense that she was saying that she had made herself recover by not bowing down to it. And that is very different from that. It's not like I can will myself out of this. I know I can't do that. No matter how much I want to be recovered in the next few months, I know I probably won't be. And so I've just taken all of that pressure off myself. I've found acceptance. I've not put myself on a timeline, and that really helps, because I just kind of keep every bit of progress I make is something to be celebrated, rather than I've not made enough progress. And so for me, that just makes my life so much better.
Yeah, you want to see progress, but that doesn't negate the fact that you can be comfortable with whatever happens presently. You're just in a position of, this is happening, and I deal with this and I face this every day, whilst also trying to work towards something in the future. I find it a really hard balance, because I have this like instinctive, competitive, deterministic like, I will do, and I will do everything, I will do this, but then I find that actually can be of a hindrance as well. Whereas when you adopt more of an approach of, right now it's fine. Everything, like, and just objectively looking and in embracing each moment that comes and just engaging with that, and just being content with that, and like not having this constant like, and that doesn't mean bowing, that doesn't mean like saying that like being negative or just saying, oh, it's hopeless, it's hopeless. It's still keeping that positivity, but it's also being, it's like with anything, like you want to go somewhere, but you can't always have your mind there. You need to have your mind in the current situation as well, so you can engage with what's happening, but then have an eye also on like where you would like to go. It's no,
I think for me, I have a visual in my mind. I've said this before in some of my posts, but I have this visual of, so I love cycling, and I just bought my new bike, and I was just getting like really into cycling when I got unwell, and I'd spent 2 weeks in Mallorca doing lots of cycling, and I just have this vision in my mind of like a really sunny day in May cycling in Mallorca with Tom, and that is what I hold on to. I think in my mind, one day that will be my reality. It's not now, but it will happen, and that's what I'm working towards. And that makes me like, every time I think about it, I just feel so good, because I know that that's what's waiting for me in my future. And it's not here now, but it will come, and so that keeps me going.
I also do think like, it's like life will be so easy.
I know.
like so kind of simple. Like I have had like glimpses. It's really strange. I get like I've had like waves where it's like something almost like switches off. I don't know what is going on, and I feel like almost like the weight lifts off, and my head, all of the fog kind of evaporates, and I'm like, shit, like you do this is like why are you not like jumping around like right now?
I know, this is amazing.
I'm like what?
I know. I do think I have people say this, I feel like it's a joke in like films and TV, like I had a near-death experience and now I have a newfound sense of life, and I genuinely think that is what I will have, because even now, like you say, I'll see my friends, and if I'm feeling good, if I have an hour or two where I feel completely normal, I'm like, this is incredible, this is amazing, like life is wonderful, and that is, I'm hoping, what my life will be like going forward. I just have to remember, I think it will be easy to fall back into old ways, so I just need to remember, like, we live a new life now, we live this like slower life, and we're more appreciative of everything that we have, that kind of approach.
So what is next for you, and what are you looking forward to, especially within the space, research, what the future holds? What are you excited about?
I'm particularly excited about we talked about this earlier, about understanding more about the gut-brain axis, because for me, my gut has been an issue for such a long time, even before long COVID. But long COVID just really exacerbated it, and I really am looking forward to the science behind the connection between the gut and the brain, and like looking into nutrition and how I can use nutrition to like fuel my energy, and also kind of going forward using my new knowledge about my body and wellness and breathing and how it works, and putting that into this exercise so that I can like become my best exercise self, like feeling it properly, and like that's what I look forward to in the future for me. But in terms of long COVID, I think I'm really enjoying at the moment seeing new papers popping up on kind of in Nature and various other journals. I'm enjoying seeing that there's more research being done, and I am enjoying that I'm seeing more coverage of it in the press. I'd like to see a lot more, and I think the Guardian generally seems to have been quite good at posting about long COVID, but there's been a bit of silence from a lot of the other papers, and I think it would be so great to see more mainstream media talking about long COVID and sharing stories.
And I think one of the ways we do that is to highlight economic impact, and I think that is because you see stories about workforce is shrinking by X amount per year. GDP is shrinking by X amount a year, and I think, the other newspapers for will be hopefully start to pick things up when that kind of information is highlighted.
Yeah, and I think for me as well, I'd love to try and raise awareness about the fact that it's also a female. Obviously, males suffer from long COVID as well, but it is a female health issue in that I think, I can't remember where I saw, but I think it's 70% female or something suffers with long COVID.
Yeah, something like that.
That might be incorrect, but I think I read something around that. But generally speaking, it is certainly more females than males who have long COVID. And that's an issue in the workplace because, for example, women already have something like maternity leave. A lot of women who have children, they will take maternity leave, and that causes them to fall behind. Not that it necessarily should, but often it does. And then women often end up being the kind of primary child carer in the family, and so you end up with fewer females higher up in the workforce. That's already an issue. And then you throw into that someone like me at the age of 30. I don't have kids. I probably wasn't going to have kids now anyway, and would be not looking to be on maternity leave for another 5 years or so. But now I've had to have all this extra time out of work anyway, so this has put me behind where I would otherwise be, and that's difficult. And there are a lot of people who aren't as lucky as me. I still have my job waiting for me at the moment. There are lots of people who haven't been lucky enough to have that situation and who have had to leave their jobs and have long-term sick leave, not working, and then to get them back into work is going to be extremely difficult, because having a phased return with an employer who knows you is much easier than a phased return
to a new job,
to a completely new job where you're going to be meeting new people, you're going to be socializing, you're going to be in a new environment. It's very difficult to manage that. And so I think more awareness needs to be raised about the fact that this is also another barrier for females working their way up the kind of ladder in their careers. And so for me, that's something I kind of want to really make people aware of, because I think it's really important in the current climate where we're trying to promote gender equality in whatever field of work it is. I think it's really important that people are aware of the health issues that can hold women back.
So what do you think the solution with that is? Do you think it's more about essentially finding a cure then, so that we can solve it?
Solve it. Like,
so that we
literally find a cure, find a cure so that people having to take time out for long COVID are not taking 2-3 years. They're taking maybe 2-3 months at most, because 2-3 months you can bounce back from. 2-3 years is really quite challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And so find a cure, find treatments that work. And the same goes for ME.
ME is it's one that's been neglected for a long. This is why I did a video recently on the importance of the charity sector with the effect that this will actually have, because when we look at the research funding into different diseases, especially in the UK, you see the majority of funding doesn't in fact come from the government, and we see calls for that, and it's right to see calls from that. But in fact, in conditions like cystic fibrosis, in conditions like Parkinson's, the majority, sometimes as high as 82% or 90% in a given year, that research funding comes from charities.
I mean, that's a high figure from charities.
Very high figure, but it highlights how critical the charity sector is in fact to developing research. And Parkinson's and cystic fibrosis have done that incredibly well, despite, especially in cystic fibrosis, you see, I think there's 100,000 people worldwide. It's a tiny disease. Yet they invest 225 million a year into research just from this one charitable organization. And
that's incredible.
If we look at the power of that for such a small population, not unimportant but small, and then we compare that to long COVID and we compare it to MECFS, how many hundreds of thousands, millions of people, we have the power to harness the very engaged, in many senses, patient community and build that into our charitable organizations, and have a professional outfit that's going to be able to lobby on behalf and going to be able to invest as well. And I think that's a really critical thing that I think it's vital for us to look at.
Yeah, I mean it's good to know. I don't think I knew that funding was so much from charities, but yeah, I think it's great to know. And obviously there's a challenge in where the hell do you start with long COVID, because there's so much going on, but it's got to start somewhere. And they've already started to make small breakthroughs, even just knowing that antihistamines work for lots of people to reduce their symptom severity. That's a breakthrough. And so yeah, I guess if we can harness the kind of wave of the community raising awareness and get more money raised and pour money into research, that would be fantastic.
For sure.
I think that's going to be on my agenda once I'm recovered. Do a charity run and raise some money for long COVID charity action, ME maybe.
Sounds like a good goal.
I know, but who knows when that will be? 2 years time. Watch out.
Amazing. Well, Lexi, thank you so much for sharing your time.
Me.
Really, really appreciate it. If people want to connect with you, I will put the links to your Instagram in the profile.
Perfect.
Anybody who has any questions, leave us a comment, and I'm sure we'll be able to answer them.
Perfect.
But yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.